So I went back to this John Locke's argument of divine morality. I've listened to it and watched it and read it over the years, but I thought it would be good to play some of it, or at least lead people that watch my channel or watch this channel to this. It's not going to be interesting to those who don't have an open mind, or those who like to listen to different perspectives of what morality is. A little bit of godliness here. Uh, but I want to lead people to John Locke's argument from 1689 for divine morality. It's a video on YouTube. Actually, there's many of them, but this guy describes it really well, and I just wanted people to be aware of it and take a look at it. Maybe it'll give you some insights on humanism and morality and who we are and ways to change and things like that. I just thought it would be positive. I know this video is not going to get a lot of views because I said the word positive, and we're trying to teach things to people who want to maybe do things in a peaceful way. But I know this video won't get a lot of views. Anytime I put anything up that has to do with positivity or religion or anything that makes sense, I don't get a lot of views, but the views that I do get are quality views, and I'm hoping the people that do watch this can take something from it.
Ought he as much as he can to preserve the rest of mankind. You should try to keep everyone else alive. I'm going to give a sort of cleaned up, schematized version of this argument. This is my sort of reconstruction of this argument. I'm going to be filling in some of the gaps for Locke. The argument is going to look like this. This is the first premise of this reconstructed argument, the first step in the argument. God created human beings with raw materials he owned. So God made people, and whatever he used to make people, whether it was dust or a bunch of muscles and tissues lying around, whatever atoms he gathered up to make people out of, they were his in the first place. That's the first step in the argument. Second step. Okay, this is premise 2, or step 2. If X creates Y with raw materials that X already owns, then Y is X's property. This seems pretty plausible. If you build a table and you build it out of wood, and you own the wood and you own the nails that you use to build the table, well then now you own the table. You own the table just like you own the raw materials. You put into it your own labor. You took something that you already owned, which was the wood. You added something else that you owned, which was your labor, your effort, your time. And now you got something new that you also own, which is the table. Okay, that's premise 2. From premise 1 and premise 2, we get a little conclusion, right? Therefore, something. Therefore what? What follows from these two premises? What must be true if 1 and 2 are true? God created human beings with raw materials that he owned. If something creates something else with raw materials that the first thing owned already, then the thing that was created is the property of the creator. So human beings are God's property because God created human beings, and whatever he used to make human beings, that was his stuff to begin with. Okay. Then we have a fourth premise that comes into the story, which is something like this. Okay, that's the fourth premise. We must not harm someone else's property. That seems right. It seems plausible, at least. If something is someone else's, then you can't harm it. You can't kill it. You can't hurt it. You can't enslave it. You can't steal from it. Okay, fine. And then we get the following conclusion. This conclusion comes from 3, which itself came from 1 and 2, and 4. Put those together and we get what? Therefore, we must not harm human beings. And that includes ourselves, right? Because we're human beings also. So this gets us to where Locke was going, right? You can't kill or hurt or enslave or steal from other people. You can't kill yourself either because you're a human being as well, right? And that's all because, well, God created us and God owns us. Something like this is close to at least the argument that Locke is giving us in the passages that we read for today. And in that passage that I just wrote up here in pink. There's nothing wrong with this argument on the face of it. I mean, you might reject some of the premises. You might think that God doesn't exist, or that God exists and didn't create human beings. So you might deny that, right? Or you might deny several other steps in the argument. But say that all of the premises of the argument are true. It seems valid or very close to valid. That is, it seems like the conclusion does follow from these premises. Even if the argument is a perfectly good argument, there's something that you can't use this argument to do. You might think you could use it to explain the existence of objective morality in the first place. You might think you could use some kind of argument like this to answer the question that we started with. Where does morality come from? The answer, if you were trying to wield this argument as an answer to a question like that, the answer would be God. These moral laws come from some things that God did. He created human beings and thereby comes to own them. So you get some specific moral laws. This is not a statement of all the moral laws that there might be, right? But it's some of them. You get the existence of those moral laws maybe from the existence of God and some facts about things that God has done. There's a problem, though. Even if this is a perfectly good argument, you can't use it to explain where all objective morality comes from in the first place. Why?
Well, because of this. Because of step 4, premise 4 of the argument.
Listen up.
We must not harm someone else's property. What do we mean, we must not? Like, we morally must not? This is a moral claim? Is this itself an objective moral law? Think about it. If it is an objective moral law, then this argument can't explain where objective moral laws come from, because there needed to be at least one of them, namely premise 4, we must not harm someone else's property. There needed to be at least one of them in order for this argument to work. So this argument can't explain where all objective moral laws come from if premise 4 is an objective moral law that needs to be assumed by the argument itself. Or, well, if this is not an objective moral law, if we say, no, this is not an objective moral law, then the must not in the conclusion, which is the same must not from premise 4, right, just applied to one case of someone's property, is not going to be, well, an objective moral demand. And so we're not going to get an objective moral law out if we don't put one in. Okay, so it seems like you just can't use an argument like this to explain where objective universal morality comes from in the first place. You can't use an argument like this to answer that kind of question, even if the argument by itself is perfectly fine and it might get you a true conclusion. Maybe. Okay, but notice that this is a rather specific moral claim that we get at the end here.
The must not.
We must not harm human beings. That's not the only kind of thing that we sometimes think of as morally obligatory, right? There are other things that some people, at least some of the time, talk about as morally required. We might think, for instance, that we're not supposed to harm not just human beings, but other living creatures.
We're not supposed to dox. We're not supposed to go real life. We're not supposed to violate terms of YouTube. But where does that must not come from? Who makes that must not? Who's the one that makes those morality laws on YouTube? Who makes those? Who does that?
Or maybe we're not supposed to harm the environment. part of which, of course, is not living at all. Or maybe there are moral rules about what you're supposed to do all by yourself when you're alone and naked. That's the sort of stuff that people sometimes talk about under the heading of, well, the one true objective morality. So even if this were going to work, this kind of argument, it's only going to get us a certain subclass of objective morality, or what we might have thought was objective morality. There's a way to produce an argument like this, an argument in this spirit, that's going to be much more general. It's going to...
Anyways, I'm going to stop it here because I want people to go listen. It's about who makes the laws. Who is the must not? Where does that morality, where does that law come from? Who decides that? Who decides that? But this gentleman, explaining John Locke's argument is very interesting, and it's very thought-provoking, and I hope some people will take a look at it. That's all. Put something good in your brain on YouTube. Every now and then, I'm involved in the drama, but I do stop and look at things like this, and I take from it what can help me, and I disregard anything that can't. This is interesting, so I hope you all take a look at it. Stellar, I expect to hear from you after you watch it. So, peace and chicken grease. And remember, who makes the rules around here? Who makes the rules all the way around for everybody? Well, it's all in the scripture. That's where the must not comes from.